Okay, let's learn how you could display a two-dimensional array so that you can actually see what numbers are in there. I've already written a method called getRandomArray where I tell it a height and a width, and it will create an array that's full of random numbers. So I don't actually know what the array looks like that it's going to return, but I'm saving it into a variable called Bob. You might hope that you could just display Bob like this. Let me show you what happens when you try and actually print the variable that contains the array. Here it is. It looks like this. And what that is that's the memory location where the array is actually stored in your computer's memory. But that's not a very helpful thing for you to be able to see. So in the lecture slides, we talked about an approach for looping over the array to print all the things. So here's what we can do. So let's print int row equals 0. Row is less than 3. And the reason I chose 3 is because I know my array has a height of 3, so the row numbers are 0, 1, and 2. So this is looping over every single row. And then for every single row, I also want to loop over every single column in that row. So I'll have call start at 0. Call is going to go up to 3. I'm going to add to the column. And now I can have a print statement, but I don't want print line because as I move across the columns, all of these values are in the same row, so I want them to display all horizontally across from each other. So I'm going to say Bob, row, column, and then maybe I'll have a space there. And then here, after this loop is over, that means that I've displayed one entire row. So what do I want the display to do at the end of the row? I want to have the display go to the next line of the output. So I want to display a new line, so that way when I go to the next row in this loop, and I display all the values in the next row, they'll be on the line underneath. Okay, so now let's run it again, and we'll see what it looks like. Wow, that's much better. So we've got 14, 5, 2. Let's try this. Here, I'm going to do a \T for tab instead of a space. Now it looks like a grid. So 6, 3, 20, 17, 15, 13. And if I run it again, I should get different numbers because the array is coming from my getRandomArray command. So you can see each time I run it, numbers are a little bit different. Instead of typing all of this in every single time we want to display an array, it would be helpful if we just had a command that was built in where we could display the array. So I'm going to cut all of this code, and I'm going to make my own command called let's just call it print for print array. And I'm going to give it Bob as an input. So I'm going to find the closing curly brace for main. And so outside of main, I'm going to make my own command, public static void. The name of the command is print. And the input is an int array. So I do int bracket bracket, meaning two-dimensional array. My friend told me that he has started pronouncing this array-ray, so int array-ray. And then I'm just going to call it R for array. Okay, so like other commands that we've worked with, whatever we put inside the parentheses here is the value that gets automatically copied inside this variable. So the grid that's inside Bob is now getting assigned to the variable R. So the code in here, if I paste the code, it doesn't know what Bob is anymore because Bob is a variable that only exists inside main. But what we did was we took the grid inside Bob and we assigned a reference to R. So that means inside this command, the new name for Bob is R. That's the variable name inside print. Okay, so we could do this, and let's actually run it just to make sure it works. So now we can just print Bob, and it should do the exact same thing. Yay, it does. And what's nice about that is if we wanted to, now that we've written the command once, we can use it a lot of times. So let's make another array that's 5 by 5, which I will call Sally. And let's print Sally. So now I'm creating a Bob array, I'm going to print it. I'm creating a Sally array, I'm going to print it. Let's maybe in between, let's display some dashes so that we know what's going on here. Okay, so when I run it, so something should seem weird to you. I'm displaying a grid and then some dashes and then a grid. But isn't Sally supposed to be 5 by 5? And here we see 3 by 3. So let's see what's happening. So 3 is the largest row I ever go to, and 3 is the largest column I ever go to. So if I want to display Sally, I'd need to change this to 5 by 5. But now if I run it, it says array index out of bounds exception. And what's happening is Bob is only 3 by 3. So if I try and loop all the way up to row 5 in Bob, that's too large. I'm trying to access a row number that doesn't exist, and that's what array index out of bounds means. It means the row 3 doesn't exist in the Bob array. So what we really need is we need some way of asking the input array how many rows does it have, so that way we can put the right number here depending on the size of the input. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Let's create new variables. I'm going to create a variable called height, and the height of the array is array.length. And you'll remember this over time, but for now you should have a reference next to you that reminds you what these are. And the width of the array is array element 0.length. So that's just something that you're going to remember for height and width. But now what we can do is we can loop rows all the way up to the height, and we can loop columns all the way up to the width. So now, depending on the size of the array, these two numbers are going to be different, and I'm going to display the entire array. So let's see what it looks like now. So now we've got a 3 by 3 for Bob, and we've got a 5 by 5 for Sally. As a last comment, if you look at other people's code, they probably won't have these two variables separately. It's a pretty standard pattern to just have the array.length be right in here, and array 0.length be right in there. And then you don't need height and width and all. So this is a pretty common pattern. But there's nothing wrong with naming your variables things that make sense to make your code easier to read. Oops. So you can feel free to do this at the beginning as you're starting to learn this. I hope that this was helpful.